Childhood trauma, or any trauma for that matter, seems to be the most defining experiences of our lives. Often I come across people who believe that because of what happened to them in childhood, they'll never be able to have the kind of peaceful life that they deserve or that they need. And as a result of that, they go through life almost focusing on everything that they need to do to protect others and also to compensate for themselves relative to what it is that they experienced. And I say any trauma, not just childhood trauma, because the impact of trauma is what is more important than the trauma itself. And I'm not playing with words. This is a serious topic. And I'm not in any way diminishing the impact that it has on our lives, on our quality of life, and our sense of self. And that's exactly why we need to unpack this, because the way it's generally unpacked is problematic in many ways. The reason it's problematic is because it frames you as a victim long after you're no longer a victim. And that is the critical part. When I say long after you're no longer the victim, I mean that if the experience of being victimized, of being a victim of something is current, then you're a victim. So if I come at you now, in this moment I'm the aggressor, you're the victim. And if you react in a way that challenges me, then you're no longer a victim, you're now a challenger, right? You're an adversary because you're claiming your space and you're pushing back. And if you then turn the tables, you then become the aggressor and I become the victim. But if you neutralize the situation, then neither one is an aggressor or a victim, but the aggression, the victimhood, all of that stops. It ceases at that point. And this is the aspect, this is the dynamic that is very seldom explored, is how do you neutralize a situation rather than how do you turn the tables, how do you teach the oppressor a lesson, all of those sorts of things. Now, in issues of criminality, that's a clean-cut issue. It's easy enough to understand how it is that we need to ensure that there's justice that's imposed or secured. But in issues of childhood trauma, for example, it's not always criminality that is at play. It's often maybe neglect or overbearing parents or harshness in method and things like that. It's very different things. And it's always subject to how the person who is on the receiving end feels about it. And that's the critical part, is understanding that how we feel about something doesn't necessarily define the reality of that on us, nor does it define the reality of what played out. Because we didn't know what we didn't know. We only had insight to a certain amount of understanding and information relative to what it is that we were experiencing. And from that perspective, if we look at it from that side of things, we need to realize that the way to overcome the impact of past experiences, be it childhood trauma or other trauma or abusive relationships, whatever it is, the way to overcome it is not to find ways of coping and surviving it. It's through gaining a better understanding, a better perspective of why it played out, how it played out, and why it is that you did not have the presence of mind or the means at the time to be able to fend it off in some way or to deal with it in a more effective way. And these are the kinds of questions and the kinds of thoughts that plague us long after the effect, long after the impact. So when I say that it's what we take from the experience that matters more than what the experience is about, this is easily demonstrated in how we see the difference between two people that might have been exposed to the same difficult experience, difficult childhood, but the one rises above it and the other one doesn't. The reason for that is not because the one is strong and the one is weak. It's just because of what it is that they take from it, what they believe to be true about it. So, for example, if I'm looking at childhood trauma or I'm looking at an experience and I see that experience as having shut me down, denied me a voice, made me feel unsafe, all of those sorts of things. What I understand about that is what's going to determine how I show up in life beyond that. So if you're a child, or when you were a child, you didn't have the sense of self, this self-awareness or the mindfulness to be able to effectively rationalize what was going on. So what happens then is that's what becomes a deeply held belief about this is the way life works, this is my place in the world, this is what the world is going to offer me or what life is offering me, and this is how I need to show up in response to that. So some of the things it teaches me is going to be things like I might be vulnerable or fragile. It might be, convince me that the world is a harsh and cruel place. It might convince me that I'm not worthy of affection, or worthy of care, or worthy of tenderness, or worthy of love, and those sorts of things. And that's what we take from it, is our belief about what it says about who we are. And then when we adopt that belief, because we're adopting it at a time in our life when we weren't mindful, we weren't self-aware, that becomes our sense of self. And this is why our relationship with our parents is so critically important, regardless of how that relationship plays out, whether they're present, absent, whatever it is. Like I've always said, it's the fact that in my internal conversation, my internal compass, I establish my sense of self relative to that relationship. And then what I do with that is what determines what I can make of life. So if I'm hung up on the fact that my parents didn't show up for me, or my father didn't show up for me, or my mother didn't show up for me, or they treated me a certain way, and I keep wanting to make sure that they understand and they fully appreciate exactly how they've impacted me and how they treated me and how harsh they were with me and how they let me down and all of those things, then that becomes the focus of my life. The focus of my life then becomes how it is that I'm going to be better than them, how it is that I'm not going to do what they did, how it is that I'm going to make sure whoever it is that is worth sharing it with, they're going to know what they're about, and all of those sorts of things. And that's the victim mindset. Because I say it's a victim mindset because you're still defined by your experience. You're not living life in that moment or about the future. You're still shaping your current life around what happened to you in the past. Now, this is, again, not diminishing the impact or the pain or the heartache or whatever it is that we feel. But the moment we define the current experience of a past incident as trauma now, we then continue to maintain ourselves in that traumatized state. But it's a traumatized state because the trauma is no longer prevalent. So it's what we've taken from it, what we still believe to be true about it, that makes it traumatic. And that's what then hinders us in our interactions, in our engagements, and in our relationships, and all of those sorts of things. Because if you still feel as if you are a trauma survivor, you're then going to look for all of the opportunities to either champion your cause for other trauma survivors, or you're going to look for opportunities to avoid being traumatized again. And that's where the triggers come from. And those then become so deeply seated that we believe that this is just who we are because of what happened to us. We can't help it. And it's that we can't help it part that we need to understand better. Because if you're going to surrender to, I can't help it, this is just the way I feel, which is the mainstream narrative out there, respect your feelings, honor your emotions and all of that, it's nonsense. It's debilitating, it's self-defeating. You don't honor your emotions. You understand why it is that you feel the way you do. And when you understand why you feel the way you do, and if that resonates with what you stand for, with your principles, with your values, with who you want to be, then by all means, invest in that emotion. So it could be excitement, it could be joy, it could be anger, it could be a resolve to be able to do something about it, to champion your cause, but do it mindfully. Don't do it because you need to protect the rest of the world from what happened to you. Because when you do that, you become part of the problem. Because then you create oppressors out of innocent people. And what I mean by that is that if we see hints or we see just subtle themes of behavior that resonate with our past experience, we automatically assume that the person who's behaving that way is like the person that treated us badly in the past. And then we preemptively and proactively go and try and either demonize them, get them to own how it is that they are abusive, etc., 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 when they never ever intended it that way, or they're not even doing it that way. But because we take it in a certain way, we hold them accountable for what we feel about how they're behaving. And that's how we create we create oppressors in others, but we also then make them victims of our oppression, because that's an oppression against them. The moment you hold someone accountable for something that they didn't do to you, but just because it resonates with something that someone else did to you, you become an oppressor. The moment you see behavior in someone that you think is problematic just because that trait or that mannerism is similar to someone else that treated you badly, that's oppression. You imposing on someone something, or the accountability for something that they had nothing to do with. And that's why when we don't own our triggers and our insecurities and our vulnerabilities, then automatically we make the people around us responsible for tiptoeing around it and for being tender about it and all of that. And there's a very fine line between being sensitive about what it is that people that we care for, what it is that they feel about certain things and what their preferences are and not. But being sensitive to it versus feeling responsible for ensuring that you don't trigger it, two totally different things. And how it is that we place demands on others, then we need to understand, denies them certain things from us. And that's the part of the whole trauma cycle that we don't consider, is that when we're still fixated on a past experience, the people in our present are denied a whole lot of things that they have a right to from us, with us, in our lives, in our space, that we don't realize because we're so distracted by the fact that we've got it bad. That's where we continue the cycle. So when we have experienced something bad, no getting away from the fact that it was bad, that it was unpleasant, that it might have been harsh, cruel, and horrible in many ways. But what we take from it is what we believe to be true about who we are versus why they did that to us. And if you consider the context I just painted a minute ago about how it is that when we're fixated on something else that happened to us, we don't realize what impact we have on the people in front of us now. Those people in front of us now, they're experiencing what they could then term as a traumatic experience with us, even though we don't intend to be traumatic to them, or we don't intend to be abusive to them. What we're actually intending is to express how it is that we're still affected and how they need to understand where we're at. And that's what happens when we go through life like desperate for people to understand how bad we've got it, how bad we've had it. That's a victim headspace. That's a victim mindset. Now, it's not about shaming the victim. It's not about blaming the victim. Because the moment you take that from what I'm saying, that confirms that you're in a victim headspace. It's about understanding that if I am in a victim headspace, what am I wanting to do about it? You've got to own it, because no one's going to uplift you from that. Because if you need someone to uplift you, you're confirming your victimhood. Now, there's a difference between someone uplifting you because you don't have resources or means or opportunity. And that's in the practical sense. But emotionally it's for you to uplift yourself. You can feel assured and you can feel kind of validated or appreciated or supported. But the choice you make in response to that is what will determine whether you continue to need that validation and assurance and support and everything for the rest of your life, or do you use that to realize that what you thought was true about why you were treated badly before, that is actually not true. And in that case, what I'm saying is that if that experience in our early years or previous relationship, whatever it was, if that experience convinced us that we were not worthy, and now we've got someone in our life that is actually treating us as if we are worthy, then that in itself conflicts with our assumption of what we took from the previous one. Now, what do we do with that? Do we appreciate their validation and their assurance and their support for us, and we just like feel safe with them, and then we need them to always be that way, otherwise we're not going to feel safe anymore? Then what we're doing is we're saying that no amount of assurance you can give me, no amount of support and affection and validation you give me is ever going to be enough for me to get out of this space. But while I'm in this space, I'll be good if you continue to do that. That feels like oppression. The person who's on the receiving end of that expectation, it feels like oppression, because then when can they count on the reverse being true? When they're having a bad moment, are you going to be capable of offering them that assurance and support and comfort and advice and a shoulder to lean on? You won't be able to, because you're in a victim headspace. And if you're in a victim headspace, you'll need them to accept those kinds of gestures from you. Which means that if they're not receptive because you don't fully understand what they're dealing with and what you're offering doesn't solve that problem, and they continue in their space, you're going to feel as if you're not enough. And that's how we make it complicated. We complicate life like this because we've lost mindfulness, emotional mindfulness about the present moment, because we're so fixated on some point in the past that affected us badly. By all means, after a bad experience, you need time to recalibrate, you need time to process, you need time to understand, because the consequences and the implications are far-reaching. But if you lose yourself to that process of reconciliation, in your mind about what happened, about what you've experienced, about what it means for you, about what it says about life and what you believe to be true about life, and all of those important questions. If you lose yourself to that journey of trying to figure it out, you then also lose sight of the fact that you are now neglecting the people who actually do care for you, or who have rights from you. So when you go through life trying to be better than, or trying to expose someone else, you actually give up your own life in the process. And the best thing you can do in that situation is not to be defined by what they did, but understand why it is that they were incapable of doing better. Because think about it, no one wakes up in the morning and decides that today I just want to be abusive. I want to traumatize someone. No one does that. Even if they wake up thinking that I want to spoil that person's day, the reason they want to do that is not because they just want to spoil that person's day. It's because something about that relationship with that person feels as if it's their cause for justice, their call to uphold something that no one else appreciates. And that's what we need to own. We need to own how it is that we choose our causes in life, that we're fighting for, that we're fighting against, and all of that. And when it comes to then relationships and parenting and all of that, it messes everything up if we lose ourselves to the past experience. It messes it up for a number of reasons. One of it is that it distracts you from what you have in your moment. Another thing is that you end up creating opportunities for the same thing to happen again because you're predisposed to it. You will lose sight of what you're attracting because you're not going to be realizing what you're offering. Let me just unpack that for a bit. If I don't know what I'm offering, or if I think I'm offering one thing, but I'm actually offering another thing, I can go through life believing that this is what I'm looking for, but I'm attracting this thing here. And in attracting this other thing here on this side, I convince myself eventually that I'm never going to get what I'm looking for. And then we think, well, it's takdir, it's fate, it's destiny, it's kismet, it's karma, it's whatever it is. Or we're not whispering the right things to the universe, or we're not being positive about it, or we're not manifesting the right thing. All of that is self-defeating. That kind of thinking is a victim headspace, because you believe you're a victim of circumstance rather than having agency to influence the outcomes. So the awareness of what we're offering is, for example, as follows. If I feel fragile and I'm looking and I'm presenting myself as this fragile individual who's just looking for love, who's looking for affection, who's looking for a nice grounded relationship, romance, and all of those ideals, what I won't realize is that I'm presenting myself as weak. Now, if I'm presenting myself as weak, right, what am I going to attract? I'm not going to attract another person who is drawn to weakness. I'm going to attract someone who's drawn to the opportunity to be all that for someone. You know what I mean? When I say all that for someone, I mean that someone who then is in this protector kind of vibe, who thinks that they can protect others, or that they are going to make someone else's life good. We attract that. Now, here's the thing. If that person comes in and they want to protect and provide and all of those sorts of things, and then because we feel enamored, we feel good about the fact that we've got this good relationship going, and we emerge from that space of being fragile, suddenly we need more from them. We don't need them to protect anymore, because now we feel like they're smothering us, like they're always reminding us of our weakness. And then they think that, oh, so now suddenly after you got what you needed from me, I'm not good enough anymore, or you got problems with everything I do or everything I say and all of these things, because they weren't expecting that they would need to grow out of that protector role of theirs. And that's one example of how you mess it up. The other example of how you can mess it up is that if you focus on being so independent that you don't need anyone, and all you're looking for is someone that's going to be like a travel partner and a buddy for life and things like that, and you want to share that space with them, you presenting yourself as being low maintenance, which means that you're going to attract someone who's looking for someone that's low maintenance. Now, here's what happens when you do that. When you're attracting someone who's looking for low maintenance, what does it say about them and their willingness and their convictions about contributing towards a relationship? It's not going to be high, because they're not looking to have a high maintenance relationship. They're looking for like minimal expectation. So now you get this partner that comes in, and you have this idea in your mind that because you're low maintenance, they should be good with you. But the moment you expect them to be more than that, to like participate and engage and be meaningfully involved in this life you're trying to create together, and they don't know how to show up like that because they were thinking, hey, that's high maintenance, you expect too much. And they start acting out. You then look at it and you think, see, I don't even ask for much, and yet look at how I'm being treated. So that means I must be not worth it. And then when you get to that idea of not worth it, you have to be very careful. Because when you get to the idea of you're not worth it, what you have to consider first and foremost is the person you're with or the person you experience something with, were they capable of offering you what you thought you are worth receiving? And that's important because if they didn't have the ability to offer it to you in the first place, then for you, it will feel as if they withholding it from you. That's why you think you're not worthy of them offering it to you. Meanwhile, they didn't have the ability in the first place. So what you think they're withholding is something that they actually don't have to give in the first place. And that's how we complicate things. And again, it's the absence of self-awareness, it's the absence of mindfulness, and it's because we're so focused on how it is that we're defined by past experiences. But now, because those past experiences defined our thinking and our sense of self at such an early age, it becomes our normal. That's what drives how we see ourselves, how we think, how we perceive life, how we perceive opportunity, success, failure, all of those things. It's all informed by what we took from those experiences. And then when you try to do better than that without understanding how that shaped you, you're going to be doing things because you're trying to be better. But that assumes that you are worse to begin with. It assumes that you are inadequate or incapable to begin with. And those are the critical assumptions that we make, that we lose sight of. Is that we lose sight of the fact that we believed or we convinced ourselves that we weren't enough. Because of the way we were treated, because of what life threw at us, we convince ourselves that we're not enough, and then we either go through life like settling or compromising on things that are important to us because we don't think that anyone is going to see it as being important to them, or we go through life with the opposite being true, that we go demanding what it is that we believe we do deserve, but because everyone keeps holding it back from us. And then that's how the victim headspace then plays out again, in that we then demand things in a way that actually becomes self-defeating or self-sabotaging in a relationship because the other person doesn't see, like, why do you have to demand it? I'll do it of my own accord. But I need to know that I'm doing it and it's going to be received and appreciated, not expected as an entitlement or as a right. And these are the kinds of discussions and kinds of communication that happens non-verbally. Because that's where we see people getting their backs up. We see people getting sensitive. We see people withdrawing, becoming passive-aggressive or becoming angry. Because anger is a demand for significance, like I said in the previous episode. Anger is a demand for significance. So that's when the anger and the frustration and annoyance and everything else comes up. Which brings me to another important point about this issue of trauma and trauma bonding and codependent relationships and all of that nonsense that they come up with. It's got nothing to do with any of that. It's that this is what we start then predisposing ourselves to because that feels familiar. Not safe, familiar. Safety is about familiarity. Safety is not about the absence of a threat. So when we recognize that, it's that if we in spaces that are unfamiliar or that we don't feel comfortable with because we're not sure how to navigate those spaces, that feels like a threat. It doesn't mean that there's a threat towards us. It doesn't mean that we are in danger. It just means that we feel as if our adequacy is under threat, our significance is under threat. And when we feel that way, that brings out a different side in how it is that we respond. And our emotional response to that drives our behavior and drives the way we come across. Sometimes we'll become passive-aggressive, sometimes we'll shut down, sometimes we'll grow distant, sometimes we'll walk away. But that is all driven by what we assume to be true about that situation and what we think others think of us. That's the problem, is that because of those past experiences, we're so focused on how we should be that we don't realize that that idea of how we should be is not based on who we want to be. It's based on how we think we are supposed to be relative to some external kind of ideal of how we should be. This is what a healthy life looks like. This is what a healthy self-esteem looks like. This is what a good relationship looks like. This is what a good life looks like. Where did we get this from? And this is why then we look at it and we think, well, social media is distorting you. Social media is not distorting you. The problem is that if you don't have an established position for yourself about what it is that you believe to be right and wrong and good and true, and you go onto social media and it offers you insight into that you don't have a view on, that you haven't got a solid point of reference in yourself about what is good and what is not good, you'll then adopt from social media what looks to be that way. And that's how the village then starts raising you in a way that the village is distorted. And that's what happens when we go to social media. We don't realize what we're looking for on social media, and then we find all of these trinkets and all of these frills and all of these trends and all of these wonderful things that makes it seem as if that's a good life, and then we aspire to want to have that. But we don't realize we're chasing someone else's goal. And that goal that we're chasing might fundamentally go against our innate, implicit belief system. It might go against what it is that we believe is important in life. It might even conflict with what it is that we experienced before, or resonate with what we experienced before. And then we end up becoming exactly like the people that treated us badly. So when you want to break the cycle and when you want to have a better life than the childhood that you had, it's about looking back with understanding that's critically important rather than looking ahead with what you need to do differently. Everyone's got good intentions about wanting to do better, be better, show up better, achieve more. There's not a single person that wants to do less than what it is that their parents might have done or whatever it is. Even if they want to do something different, it means that they don't want to do what their parents did, but they want to achieve more in their own way relative to what's important to them. We're always aspiring to be more impactful. But if we don't know how to do that, we're going to fail, and then we're going to convince ourselves it's destiny playing out. It's fate, it's the universe, it's something else, and we give up our agency, we give up our control, and we give up our accountability over the consequences of the bad choices that we make. If you get something wrong, you need to understand why you got it wrong. If someone else got something wrong, you need to understand why they got it wrong. And understanding is not condoning. So if you treat someone badly, in your mind, you know, I'm sorry I treated you badly, but I got very angry because of X, Y, and Z. It had nothing to do with that situation or what they did to us, but we know that we felt that way in that moment because of a past experience that hit home in that moment. And then we realize that, okay, our anger wasn't warranted, or our sharp remarks, or our condescension, or hurtful comments, or whatever it was. We then, in retrospect, realize it wasn't warranted. And we don't consider why it is that we did that. We just apologize for that, and we promise never to do it again. The promise we make in that moment is a sincere one, for the most part. But if we don't know what drove us to that, the next time something happens that looks different but feels the same, is going to drive us to it again, and it's going to look as if our previous promise wasn't sincere. And then we're going to struggle with that, because why do I keep doing this even though I don't want to? And why is it that you keep breaking your promise to me even though I trusted you? And that's how life gets complicated again. So until you understand why, it becomes something that you can't make peace with. And if you can't understand why, if there's no opportunity to get more insight into it, but you're also not willing to let it go, to trust that, yes, even though you don't know why, you can trust that there must have been other things at play that you didn't have sight of. And that's why it didn't go the way it should have gone, or that's why you didn't have the kind of peace and harmony and loving environment in the home that you would have deserved or that was needed for a child. When you realize that there were things outside of your understanding and realm of control that caused those things to happen, suddenly you're not a victim of their behavior, you're a victim of circumstance. And the victim of circumstance ceases to be a victim the moment the circumstances change. That's what we need to understand. If you remain in the victim headspace, you'll recreate those circumstances for the rest of your life. Because you're going to find that challenge, you're going to find that cause, that call to rise up and fight injustice, and that in every setting that you see. Because then you're this justice warrior. But if you're a justice warrior, you have to find opportunity to fight for justice, which means that you're going to see oppression where it isn't. You're going to see oppressors with people who are just misunderstood, or people you just disagree with, or people you don't align with in their thinking or understand where they're coming from. So when it comes to reconciling in our mind the impact of trauma, the impact of past experiences, abusive relationships, and all of that, the first step is to recognize within ourselves what is it that we were convinced is true about who we are relative to that experience. If you think you're vulnerable, then you are. No one else can tell you you're vulnerable. You have to believe it. And if you believe it, that's on you. And if it's true that you are vulnerable for practical reasons, then do something about it. Don't say, oh, I'm vulnerable, so I need you to protect me. No, do something about it. Change your circumstance. Leave, move, change something. Become more adequate, become more capable. Improve your knowledge, your understanding, your capability, your skill, your talent, whatever it is. You have the ability to improve your state rather than surrendering your state because something from the past just doesn't feel right yet. That's the victim headspace that is destroying us. It's destroying homes, it's destroying families, it's destroying relationships. Because we're holding someone accountable for something that they had nothing to do with. And if you look back in the past, you'll find that if you had parents who had difficult relationships with their parents, they would then struggle to show up for you as a parent. And if they don't go through the process of trying to learn how it is that impacted them, they will then pass it on to you, because that's the aggression, that's the anger, the frustration, the irritability, all of that that's passed down. And then you experience that, and then you become intolerant towards people that treat you that way. And then the moment someone demands something from you that is more than that, you feel irritable and feel as if it's an unfair demand. And then that's how you become angry and all of that. And that brings me to another important point. We're too quick to go from 0 to trauma, 0 to abuse, 0 to toxic. There's a whole range of things that happen in between those 2 points. You get irritable, you get frustrated, you get annoyed, you get angry. People get angry, people get annoyed, people get frustrated. And they have a right to it. And to understand why it is that they do that is more important than just labeling them as toxic because they're not behaving in a pleasant way that you need them to behave. Because when you then demand them to behave in a certain way while their emotions are prompting them to behave differently, you're showing them the same insensitivity that you're demanding them to show you sensitivity about. So that makes you just as abusive as them, if that's how you're going to term abuse. If that's how you're going to term toxic, then when you demand someone to suppress how they feel because the way they're expressing how they feel is not healthy, then you again also becoming then just as toxic as you think they are. Because it's one thing to challenge someone and say, listen, your aggression or your anger or the way you're acting out is just not on. But it's another thing to stop at that point and not offer them anything beyond that to say, well, let's figure out what's going on. Why is it that you feel this way? Why is it that you're so quick to anger? Why is it that you're so irritable? Why is it that you're always making negative assumptions about me? Why is it that no matter what I do, nothing is ever enough? Because the moment I do something that you don't like, then everything else is discarded. Those are meaningful conversations to have. As opposed to, oh, you're toxic because the moment I make one mistake, then the whole house comes down. Forget about this toxic label that we're placing on everyone, the narcissist label that we're placing on people. Start seeing the human in yourself and in others. And that, as always, is only possible if you do see it within yourself. You can't give what you don't have. So if you don't see yourself as human, if you don't see your own human facets, your own everything that makes you human, both the good and the bad, because we all have the good and the bad in us. I'm not talking philosophically, I'm talking of practically, in reality. We all want to be good, but we sometimes act badly because of what it is that we need to be good. We feel as if we can't condone the fact that it's not there. We can't condone the fact that someone's not showing up for us the way they do. So that's why we act badly, because we want to convey a message to them, like this is unacceptable. And talking is not always the most effective way, because if you're only just going to talk about it, then you deny the range of emotions that gives people reason to understand when something is more serious than other things. And we've lost that art of communication because everything is so sanitized these days. We have to allow ourselves to be human. We have to allow our parents to be human. We have to allow our children to be human. And when we connect with that humanness, we then have a better chance of influencing through positive kind of input, not positive thinking input, through like effective, practical support and guidance to be able to improve that situation, rather than just positive thinking and hoping that things come right or change and improve for the better. We've lost the plot on how it is to be human. And that's why we find it so difficult to reconcile our experiences as humans with real life. And real life is difficult. It's never ever intended to be easy. But it's only seen as a difficult, negative struggle if you're expecting everything to go smoothly. It doesn't work that way. You can't choose when something is going to go smoothly or not, because you're only going to discover that you might not have been aware of something that was influencing the outcome after you've already applied yourself. And then when you realize that there was something else that was influencing the outcome and you do something about that actively, then you stand a chance of the next time that you try it, you can have a better outcome. Because you took active, deliberate, meaningful steps towards improving the situation. You didn't sit back and complain and whine and wait for someone else to change the way they are before you allowed yourself to be better. And that's always what it comes down to, is who do you choose to be? And if who you're choosing to be, you're finding difficulty in being that, then it's for you to understand why. It's not for someone else to take accountability for not supporting you enough. That's why you can't be that. Childhood trauma is in itself terrible. But it doesn't mean that it becomes the defining tone of who you are for the rest of your life. That's what you choose to take from it. There is no shortage of very inspirational stories of people who just chose not to be defined by their bad experiences. And that's it. It's really as simple as that. Do you choose to be defined by your past and then restrain yourself and withhold and contaminate your efforts towards everyone in the future without realizing that you're doing that? Or do you see your past for what it was and recognize what it is that's true about the present moment, so that you have a meaningful insight and understanding of what you need to do, improve on and change and understand better and learn, so that your future can be better than what it is that you had in the past? It's always about your agency and your contribution. It's never just about it happened to me so I can't help it. Choose better. Don't be defined by your trauma or your traumatic experiences or your last bad relationship. Learn from it and embrace the fact that you didn't know what you didn't know. If we knew what we didn't know, we would have made a better decision. And similarly, others would have made better decisions in how they showed up in the relationship. And that's why sometimes you go through a breakup and you see someone that you were with and they were a certain way with you, and then you see them in a new relationship and you see they all of that that you needed from them, they now suddenly better in that way with someone else. It's not because you didn't deserve it or because they were withholding it from you. It's that breakup and what they lost and everything else could have informed them differently, and that's why they became better prepared for how it is that they needed to appreciate or show up in the next relationship. Also, your insecurities could be a trigger for their demons of their insecurities, and that's why there was always a clash. And now they're with someone who their demons don't clash as much, so that's why it just makes it easier for them to show up. Stop reading into everything from a victim mindset, believing that just because someone offers something to someone else but not to you, it's because of who you are to them. No, it's because of what you represent to their insecurities. We can continue talking about this at length, but I'm hoping that by now you realize that trauma and the impact of trauma has a limited shelf life, but we extend that shelf life when we keep investing in the impact of the trauma. You have to understand it, you have to realize that it took place at that moment in time, and the only thing that changes beyond that is what it is that you believe you are capable of doing to mitigate it in future. And the better you are at being able to mitigate it in future, the less reason you have to feel on edge about the fact that it's going to happen again. And that's how life works. Learn, repeat, learn, repeat. If you don't learn, you're just going to be repeating the same mistakes, waiting for it to change. Doesn't work that way. Take care, let me know what you think, and I hope to get more on this in future episodes as well. And if you want something that is really bearing down on you, and you're not finding any meaningful answers that's causing a real change in how it is that you need to figure it out, drop me a message, and let's see if I can unpack it for you in one of the future episodes. Take care.